I woke up to the sound of children cheering and some kind of confetti cannon going off. It wasn't coming from the street, though. It was coming from my backyard. Still in my pajamas, I shuffled to the window, rubbed my eyes, and nearly had a stroke. There, in my private pool, my clear, sparkling, perfectly maintained pool, was a literal crowd of people. Streamers dangled from trees, pink balloons everywhere, and a massive banner that said, "It's a girl," floating over what used to be blue water, and standing front and center with a champagne glass in hand, grinning like she'd won a game show, was none other than Karen from the HOA. That's when I realized I was about to lose my damn mind. It didn't feel real at first. I stood there blinking at the pink pool, thinking maybe I was still dreaming. But the laughter, the music, and the sounds of people splashing around were very real. I rushed outside barefoot, heart pounding, phone in hand and voice already rising. As soon as I opened the gate to the backyard, a woman I didn't recognize shoved a cupcake in my hand and said, "You must be the pool guy. Good job on the theme." I dropped the cupcake and marched to the edge of the pool. Karen was talking loudly into a microphone, thanking everyone who made this surprise possible. People clapped. A kid in a tutu jumped off the diving board. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I'd crack a tooth. "Karen," I yelled, trying not to sound like a lunatic. "What the hell is going on here?" She looked up with that smug HOA queen face of hers and casually stepped out of the pool area, heels clicking on the stone. "Oh, good morning. I was hoping you'd be okay with this. It's my niece's gender reveal. Isn't it beautiful? We didn't have anywhere big enough, so I thought, hey, your backyard is so underused. Why not make it magical?" "You broke into my property," I shouted. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, waving a manicured hand like I was overreacting to someone stealing a slice of pizza. "Your side gate was unlocked." "No, it wasn't. I keep it padlocked." "Oh, that. We had to snip it. You really should use better locks." I almost couldn't breathe. My fists clenched. My brain started flipping through revenge fantasies automatically. She had the audacity to admit she broke in, hosted a party, dyed my pool water pink, and was now acting like I should thank her for the favor. I walked around taking pictures with my phone of everything. Streamers, pink water, the little stage set up by the diving board, the huge speaker system someone had installed. It wasn't just a pop-up party. This had been planned, coordinated, maybe for days, and it was all done behind my back. Then she dropped the real bombshell. "I mean," she said sweetly, "I ran it by the HOA board last week, and nobody objected, so technically this is all within regulation." I blinked hard. "Karen, you don't even have the authority to approve events on private property." "Oh, I'm not the one who approved it," she said with a twinkle in her eye, "but you know how these things go. Unofficially, everyone was totally on board. The only thing I was on board with was calling the cops. So that's what I did. But the moment I pulled out my phone and started dialing, Karen's tone shifted fast. "You're seriously calling the police?" she said, voice rising. "Over a pool party for a baby?" "No, Karen. For trespassing and destruction of property and unauthorized use of my land and breaking and entering." "Want me to keep going?" People started to notice the tension. A few awkward chuckles from the partygoers turned into silence. Karen held up her hand like she was a celebrity needing crowd control. "You're ruining a very special day," she snapped. "You ruined my property." I fired back. She crossed her arms. "You do this and I swear I'll have your landscaping permit revoked. I'll report your yard as a hazard zone. You're in violation of several aesthetic guidelines as it is." That's when she made her biggest mistake. She pulled out her phone and called the police herself. "Yes, hello, I'm the president of the HOA. I'm at a residence and the homeowner is being aggressive. Yes, I'm concerned for everyone's safety." The cops arrived 15 minutes later, just as Karen was giving a toast with sparkling cider. I stood by the side gate, ready for war. When the officers stepped into the backyard, they were visibly confused by the decorations, the crowd, and the extremely pink water. Karen rushed up to them first. "Officers, thank goodness. This man has been threatening us and trying to shut down a peaceful family event." The officers turned to me. I explained everything, showed them the pictures, explained the padlock being cut, the unauthorized entry, and that I hadn't given anyone permission to be on my land. To their credit, they didn't buy Karen's story for a second. One officer quietly asked me if I wanted to press charges. I told him not yet, not until I figured out just how deep this disaster went. Karen's face went red when they warned her she had no legal ground to host anything here. They instructed her to remove everyone immediately. Her niece started crying. A guy holding a diaper cake started arguing with someone about why this wasn't in a public park. And just like that, the pink parade started packing up. Before she left, Karen turned to me and whispered with venom in her voice, "You're going to regret this." I whispered back, "You already do." By sunset, my pool looked like a strawberry milkshake, and my blood pressure hadn't dropped below DEFCON 3. But I wasn't going to let this go. She thought she could use my space, trash it, and walk away with nothing but a warning. She was about to find out that I play the long game. And unlike her, I play it legally, because if she wanted to paint my pool pink without asking, I'd make sure the next time she looked over that fence, she'd see nothing but a mud pit where her little fantasy once stood. The morning after the pink pool fiasco, I expected silence. Maybe some residual shame drifting through the neighborhood like smoke after a fire. But no, Karen had already started her next move. I hadn't even finished my coffee when I got the first HOA violation notice. It was taped to my door in a clear plastic sleeve, like some kind of corporate scarlet letter. Apparently, my backyard event had caused a noise disturbance, damaged community tranquility, and violated Article 6.32 of the HOA Code, whatever that even meant. I stared at it, blinking, because this wasn't just passive aggression, it was open warfare. I walked out to the mailbox and found 3 more letters. One was a formal notice citing disruptive property modifications. Another was a citation for pool chemical imbalance. And the third was a request to appear before the HOA board in 3 days to discuss my pattern of non-compliance. The only pattern I had was trying to live in peace while Karen treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom. This wasn't petty anymore. This was strategic. She was paper-cutting me to death with violations and technicalities, trying to bury me in bureaucracy until I backed off or made a mistake. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I spent the next few hours digging through every HOA document I had, every guideline, every bylaw. Then I started collecting evidence. I had screenshots of her Facebook posts bragging about the gender reveal. She even posted a selfie from my pool with the caption, "Best surprise ever." I downloaded footage from my outdoor security camera, which clearly showed her and 2 other people cutting my lock and hauling in party supplies like they were staging Coachella. It even had sound. One of them joked, "What if he comes home early?" And Karen laughed and said, "Then he'll have to deal with it." Still, the thought of attending that HOA board meeting made my stomach churn. The board was mostly made up of Karen's friends or people too intimidated to oppose her. I knew walking in there would be like stepping into a snake pit. But I wasn't going unarmed. 2 nights later, I showed up 15 minutes early and sat in the back of the community clubhouse, laptop and folder in hand. Karen strutted in like she owned the place, wearing some kind of floral blazer that made her look like an overconfident garden gnome. She didn't even look at me. The meeting started with boring stuff, budget allocations, fence height complaints, some guy whining about raccoons in his trash bins. Then came my hearing. Karen cleared her throat and read her complaint like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Mr. Mitchell has exhibited repeated disregard for community standards, culminating in a hostile confrontation during what was intended to be a joyful communal event. His aggressive behavior, property neglect, and general hostility to HOA regulations has become disruptive to neighborhood peace. That was her narrative. I was the problem, not her illegal party, not the trespassing. Me, when she finished, I calmly asked for my turn. They granted it, expecting, I assume, a flustered defense. Instead, I loaded the video onto the projector they use for budget slideshows and hit play. Silence filled the room as the footage ran. There she was, bolt cutters in hand, chatting away like she was hosting a game night. I let it roll long enough to show the inflatables being thrown over the fence and someone installing speakers. When the audio of her saying, "Then he'll have to deal with it," played, you could practically hear her stomach drop. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a quiet older man named Victor who usually kept his head down, actually chuckled and said, "Well, that's pretty clear." Karen snapped, accusing me of invasion of privacy, claiming the video was edited, and then, in a wild twist, insisted she had verbal permission from my housekeeper. I didn't have a housekeeper. I told them that. Twice. She kept arguing anyway. It was like watching a bad liar try to keep a sinking raft afloat with duct tape. Still, despite the evidence, the board was spineless. They voted to split responsibility, fining Karen for trespassing, but also fining me for failing to properly secure private property. I almost laughed. They basically blamed me for getting robbed. After the meeting, while people shuffled out, Victor quietly approached me. He said he'd been on the board for years and was sick of Karen's antics. He told me there were internal emails. Karen had bragged to other members that she could make any complaint stick, that nobody ever had the patience to fight back. "She counts on exhaustion," he told me. "She drains you until you quit." That sentence stuck with me. She didn't just want control, she wanted surrender. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I was going to go on offense, but not loud, not dramatic. Quiet, precise, legal. Something she wouldn't even see coming. I went home that night and dug through the HOA landscape and renovation rules. I found something strange. A clause buried deep in the guidelines allowed homeowners to perform temporary environmental landscaping for purposes of ecological rehabilitation, so long as it didn't interfere with permanent structures. The language was vague, but the loophole was perfect. It meant, with the right paperwork, I could dig, modify, and reseed parts of my property without HOA approval if I framed it as a restoration project. It didn't say anything about having to keep the pool clean while doing it. The next morning, I went to a local garden center and started getting estimates on dirt, mulch, and native plant seeds. I called a few landscaping companies, told them I wanted a soil restoration project around my pool area. They quoted me high, but I found one willing to help if I just wanted the area to look like a wild, natural wetland. That's exactly what I wanted. Mud, dirt, reeds, the works. Not only would it make the pink pool disappear, it would make her furious. As the first truckload of dirt rolled into my backyard 3 days later, I stood in my driveway sipping lemonade. Karen passed by, walking her dog. She slowed when she saw the truck and frowned. "What are you doing now?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Restoring the natural environment," I replied with a smile. "You're turning your pool into a swamp." "No, into a protected habitat. Temporary, of course. It's for the birds." She muttered something under her breath and stormed off, but I could tell, for the first time, she had no idea what I was doing. No angle to fight it. No violation to report. She was officially out of her depth, and I was just getting started. By the time the third truck unloaded its cargo into my backyard, the place looked more like a construction site than a suburban pool area. My once glorious tiled patio was now buried under a mess of moist earth, mulch piles, and native grasses that were still in their nursery pots. The pool itself had disappeared beneath a thick, dark slurry of clay, compost, and black soil that had been poured in gradually, transforming the shiny pink crime scene into what resembled the early stages of a muddy swamp. I had signs printed that read, "Soil Stabilization in Progress," "Ecological Rehab Project," and posted them in full view from the street. Karen passed by the first morning after the mud dump, paused mid-stride, and stood there staring at the sign with the sort of expression people usually reserve for dead animals in the road. She didn't say anything at first. She just gawked, eyes darting from the swampy mess to the official-looking signs, then to the landscaping crew still smoothing out the muddy surface like they were icing a cake. I stayed calm, leaned on my fence, and took slow sips of coffee like I had all the time in the world. It killed her, not knowing how to attack it. This wasn't something she could just slap a violation on. I had the documentation. I had the clause. And best of all, I had time. That afternoon, She knocked on my door with a forced smile and a notepad. She always carried a notepad when she was in HOA mode, like it made her look more official, more powerful. But this time, her tone was different. It wasn't accusatory. It was laced with false curiosity. "So what exactly is all this?" she asked, waving a hand toward my dirt-covered backyard like she was gesturing to a pile of garbage. "I'm restoring native wetland habitat," I replied flatly. "In your pool?" "Technically, it's a water catchment basin now. The soil needs stabilization, and I'm following every ecological guideline in the handbook." She tapped her pen on the notepad. "Well, that's not very neighborly, is it? It's not very aesthetically aligned with the community." "Fortunately," I said, "the HOA guidelines state that natural restoration projects are exempt from visual conformity standards for up to 90 days. You can check section 14.8. I knew she would, and I knew it would drive her insane. She left without another word, muttering to herself and scribbling something angrily in that notepad like it could change reality. But I wasn't done twisting the knife. I added a few garden features to make the mess even more absurd. A little frog sanctuary sign made from reclaimed wood, a solar-powered bubbling fountain that poured into a plastic pond liner buried just deep enough in the mud. I even planted tall reeds and cattails around the edges, which made the area look like an actual swamp. By week's end, local birds began visiting. Karen's dog refused to walk past the fence anymore. That weekend, the HOA board held an emergency walkthrough inspection of the neighborhood. I'd heard through the grapevine that Karen had demanded it, claiming my property had become a biohazard. They arrived in cardigans and clipboards, wearing strained expressions, clearly unsure what they were even looking for. I greeted them with printed packets of the regulation clause I was using, a timeline of the project, receipts from the landscaping company, and a letter from the local ecological society I joined for the occasion. When Karen saw the HOA board members nodding and murmuring, that checks out," her face turned the color of boiled shrimp. She tried everything, claiming the mud was attracting mosquitoes, arguing that children could fall in and get stuck, even insisting the smell was affecting local property values. But I had documentation for mosquito control, fencing around the perimeter, and even a scent neutralizer installed near the fence line. The OOA had no choice but to approve it. They hated it, sure, but they couldn't legally stop it. Karen stormed off mid-meeting, throwing her clipboard into the front seat of her car so hard the horn honked. I smiled through it all, thanked the board for their time, and offered bottled water like I was the most polite villain in history. But it didn't end there. Karen's desperation mutated. She started a petition among neighbors to restore community visual harmony, but barely anyone signed. Most people were just relieved someone had finally stood up to her. Rain came in heavy that Friday, the kind of relentless downpour that turned roads into rivers and backyards into squelching bogs. But where most homeowners saw inconvenience, I saw opportunity. I stood by my back window, watching the storm soak every inch of my freshly laid mud pit. Water pooled at the base, swirling the clay and compost into a thick brown stew. My fake wetland had turned into a real swamp, just in time for Karen's grand recovery stunt. She was calling it a community unity gathering, a last-ditch attempt to prove she still had control before the HOA vote on her presidency. The invitation had gone out to every resident, including me, though I was fairly certain mine had been more of a formality than a gesture of goodwill. Her plan was simple: host a perfectly orchestrated block party in the lot next to my house, one the HOA technically owned, and use it to remind everyone how valuable she was. There would be free food, lawn games, music, and an official-sounding neighborhood renewal pledge she would present, no doubt filled with vague promises and self-praise. What she hadn't accounted for was that the corner of the lot she chose for the main setup was directly next to the lowest point of my yard, right beside the mud pit. I watched as tents were pitched early the next morning, tables unfolded, speakers tested, all while the sky still drizzled and the earth beneath sagged with moisture. A cotton candy machine struggled to spin in the humidity. Kids ran through puddles. The bounce house inflated, then deflated twice before finally staying upright. The whole thing looked like a desperate wedding reception battling Mother Nature and losing. By noon, people had started trickling in. There were awkward clumps of neighbors standing around plastic tables, holding soggy paper plates and trying to avoid the obvious. Nobody really wanted to be there. Karen made her rounds, forcing smiles, handing out hand-sanitized cookies, and asking leading questions about how much better things have been lately. Most people just nodded politely, their umbrellas tilting toward the sound of dripping tents. And then came the stroller incident. Karen's niece, the same one from the pink pool disaster, arrived with her newborn baby in a stroller so massive it looked like a parade float. Karen beamed like royalty. She escorted her around like the child was a trophy. But the ground was slick, the paths narrow, and the edge of the party zone too close to my muddy masterpiece. One wrong turn, one push of the wrong wheel, and the stroller tipped toward my yard slope. The front wheels hit the edge, and the rest happened in slow motion. The entire stroller rolled, bounced, and then sank halfway into the mud pit with a wet-sucking sound that made several guests gasp out loud. Screams erupted. The baby wasn't inside, thankfully, but the sight of Karen's niece wailing while Karen dove into the mud in her pastel skirt set the party into full chaos. Her shoes vanished in the muck within seconds. She tried pulling the stroller out, slipped, and landed flat on her back, arms flailing, face spattered with sludge. Cameras clicked. Phones came out. Someone was already live-streaming. I stepped outside with perfect timing, holding an umbrella in one hand and a steaming mug of coffee in the other. I stood on my back porch, far from the mud, but close enough to be noticed. Karen looked up at me, drenched, panicked, and absolutely covered in filth. She screamed at someone to call for help, but no one moved. Most people were just filming now, barely containing their laughter. One neighbor chuckled, "Guess we know whose habitat this really is." Eventually, a few brave souls helped her out. The stroller was a lost cause. Her clothes were stained beyond repair. Her hair looked like it had been dipped in gravy. As she limped out of the pit, cursing and sputtering, the rain began to lighten, almost mockingly. I didn't say a word. I just raised my coffee slightly in her direction. A silent toast to poetic justice. The rest of the event dissolved shortly after. The raffle was canceled. The pledge never got read. People left in droves, muttering about needing to wash off the awkwardness. Someone slipped on a patch of wet grass and twisted their ankle. A teenager kept replaying the mud dive footage on their phone for friends, laughing hysterically. Karen had tried to stage her comeback and instead turned herself into a neighborhood meme. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Victor, the soft-spoken board member. It was a screenshot of a group chat among the other HOA members. Karen's name was at the top, followed by a motion filed to remove her as president, effective immediately. 3 out of 5 had already voted yes. Victor added, "The 4th vote just came in. She's out." I didn't reply right away. I just stood there for a moment, reading it over, feeling the weight of it settle in. Karen's reign was officially over. She wasn't just publicly humiliated, she was politically dethroned. The next day, a cleanup crew arrived at her house early in the morning. They hosed off her driveway, threw out her mud-caked patio furniture, and even pressure-washed her front porch. Her flag with the HOA emblem came down. Her inbox pinged with official notices. I could hear her yelling through her kitchen window, slamming cabinets and pacing like a lion in a cage. The woman who used to walk the neighborhood like a queen now hid inside, blinds drawn, reputation in ruins. Still, I knew she wasn't done. Karen wasn't the kind of person to quietly accept defeat, but this wasn't her neighborhood anymore. She'd lost the board, lost the crowd, and lost the one thing she valued more than control, her image. The mud on her clothes would wash away, but the mud online wouldn't. That footage of her flailing in the pit had already made its way onto the local community Facebook page. One clever neighbor captioned it, "Karen, Queen of the Quagmire." I watched it loop over and over, and I'll admit, I laughed harder than I probably should have. She had thrown a party to rebuild her legacy, and instead, she'd been dragged down, literally, by her own arrogance. The irony was so rich I could have bottled it and sold it as luxury syrup. And yet, I wasn't finished. The mud pit was still just phase 2. Phase 3 was about to begin, because while Karen might have lost the crown, I still had one last surprise left, something buried deep in the records, something she never saw coming. And when I pulled that thread, she'd find herself not just humiliated, not just defeated, but completely erased from the community she thought she ruled. The fallout after Karen's muddy demise was everything I had hoped for and more. The very next HOA meeting was the first one she hadn't attended in nearly 7 years, and the mood in the clubhouse was so different it was almost surreal. People smiled, laughed more freely, and spoke without watching over their shoulders. The board elected a new interim president, a woman named Elaine who had lived in the neighborhood just as long as Karen, but had somehow avoided the spotlight. Her first act as president was to declare a 30-day amnesty for any minor HOA violations that had built up under Karen's rule, which was met with actual applause. Neighbors were relieved, rejuvenated, and for once united, not because they liked each other more, but because the common tyrant had finally fallen. As for me, I was enjoying a new level of respect. People who used to nod politely in passing now stopped to talk, asked questions, even laughed about the mud pit saga. One guy down the block told me he used to dread living here, but now felt like maybe it wasn't such a bad place after all. I had become an accidental symbol of resistance, but I didn't let it go to my head, because while everyone else saw the story as finished, I knew it wasn't. Not yet. There was one loose end I hadn't tied up, and it had been gnawing at me since Victor first hinted at it. During one of our back and forths, he let slip something odd. Karen had never technically been eligible to serve as HOA president. At first, I thought he meant a paperwork error or some forgotten election rule, but the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. So I dug into the HOA charter again, and that's when I found it. Section 3.12, tucked into a rarely read amendment, clearly stated that only full-time residents of a primary property within the community could serve on the board. Not renters, not guests. Homeowners only. I double-checked county records. I looked up tax filings. And there it was, plain as day. Karen's name was not listed as the homeowner of her residence. The deed belonged to someone else, her sister Paula, which meant Karen had been living in the guest house behind Paula's property all these years, illegally holding a title she was never allowed to claim. And the best part, HOA elections were only valid if held by a fully authorized board, which meant every decision she had made, every fine, every rule enforcement, it was all built on a foundation of fraud. I packaged the evidence neatly, printed copies of property records, screenshots of Karen signing emails as HOA president, meeting minutes she had shared, even a photo from her niece's gender reveal, standing in my backyard, a pink champagne flute in one hand and her president's stash in the other. Then I dropped the packet in an envelope, addressed it to Elaine, and hand-delivered it to her porch with a sticky note that said, "You're going to want to read this. All of it." 2 days later, Elaine called me. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the restrained excitement beneath it. She confirmed everything I had found, and then told me they were preparing a formal HOA memo to all residents. Karen's tenure was officially being erased. The board had voted unanimously to void her past presidency and, by extension, remove all non-critical penalties and fines issued during her term. It was as if she had never been in charge at all. The memo was distributed within the week. It read like a polite obituary for Karen's reign, stating the need for clarification and structural correction, and announced that, moving forward, the HOA would be conducting an internal audit of past actions. In bureaucratic terms, it was brutal. In neighborhood terms, it was a cleansing reign. Karen tried to retaliate, of course. She started handing out leaflets door to door, ranting about corruption and betrayal, about how she had sacrificed years of unpaid service, only to be thrown aside. Most people just closed their doors. A few handed her leaflets right back. Someone even taped one to her car with a note that said, "We prefer mud." Then came the final blow. It turned out her living arrangement with her sister wasn't entirely above board either. Karen had claimed guest status on her property to avoid paying additional county taxes, but with everything now under a microscope, the zoning office got involved. and suddenly Karen wasn't just evicted from power. She was being evicted from the neighborhood altogether. The guest house had violated municipal code due to improper permits. Paula received a notice of compliance, and Karen was given 30 days to relocate or face fines. The morning she moved out, I didn't throw a party. I didn't cheer. I just stood at my window, coffee in hand, and watched her drag plastic bins into a U-Haul. No crowd gathered. No one came to help. She looked smaller than I remembered, hunched over, muttering to herself. When she turned to look at my house one last time, I nodded once, not with smugness, but finality. The game was over. 2 weeks later, I hired a crew to restore my backyard. The mud was cleared, the soil regraded, and the pool professionally resurfaced. It cost a bit, but thanks to Elaine's new reforms, the HOA covered part of the expenses under the Neighborhood Damage Restoration Clause, a little poetic justice baked right into the budget. The day the pool was refilled, clear and blue, like the day I moved in, I sat out back with a drink in hand, watching the water shimmer in the sunlight. No pink, no parties, no Karen, just peace. Later that weekend, I threw a real party. Nothing flashy, just a handful of neighbors, some burgers on the grill, music at a volume that wouldn't raise eyebrows. Victor showed up with his wife. Elaine brought cookies. Martha brought a folding chair and planted herself near the edge of the pool, smiling the entire time. At one point, someone jokingly asked if I'd ever turn the yard into a swamp again. I laughed and said only if another Karen tried to take over. But inside, I knew it wouldn't come to that. This wasn't just my yard anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight madness isn't louder madness. It's smart revenge, well-timed, well-aimed, and buried just deep enough that when it finally hits, it takes everything with it. The HOA learned its lesson. The neighborhood changed.